Welcome to This Week in Buffalo Sports. I'm Stu Boyar along with Tony Fiorello. Today's show is sponsored by Western New York Immediate Care, the Paul Wolf Insurance Agency, and Logistics Plus of Buffalo. And the topic of the week is the Buffalo Bills wildcard playoff game against Denver at 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon at Highmark Stadium. The Bills are a pretty big favorite, Tony. This is kind of a scary matchup. As well as the Bills have played, especially at home this season, it's a scary matchup. Denver's got a tough defense.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I mean, you had three potential matchups for the Bills as the 2 seed, going against the 7. You had Denver, Miami, Cincinnati. The one I think everybody didn't want to go against was Cincinnati because it's pretty obvious. Burrow, Chase, Higgins. I don't think anybody wanted to get into a shootout with them, even though Buffalo could put up 30, 40 points a game, But, at first when I saw the other two, I said, Denver, they could be a good matchup. But then the more I thought about it, the more I said Miami, because we all know that the Bills generally own the Dolphins. But then Denver's coming in here, and they look pretty solid.
Well, the Bills needed a 61-yard field goal to beat the Dolphins last time. Mm-hmm. Denver has a very good defense, outstanding Super Bowl winning head coach. They came in here last year and beat the Bills, thanks in large part to a special teams gaffe.
Which are still happening now.
Well, and that's part of the problem. And the Bills' return man, Codrington, was a little bit banged up last week in New England, so hopefully he's able to go, but we don't know how good he'll be. The odds makers say Buffalo is a 9-point favorite, and the over-under is 47. Now, the Bills like to score a lot of points. They're pretty good at it. They've scored, 30 points at home 6 times this season? And but that Denver defense is a little scary. They get after the quarterback pretty good. Patrick Surtain on the outside is a good corner. So Bills have their work cut out for them. And the way this season is gone, this is the way I look at it anyway, a lot of people said the Bills weren't going to be very good. They lost too much. But I think when a team pays $31 million to get rid of a headache, Stephon Diggs, it's addition by subtraction. So that allows everybody else to kind of blossom, which is what I think happened. And, of course, they have Josh Allen, and he's the key. So I don't know anything about odds, but if I were a betting man, I would probably take Denver in the points because I have trust issues with the Bills' defense.
Right. This is probably it might be the worst defense that McDermott has had in his 8 years here. I mean, it's not really a personnel issue. I think it's it's a couple of things, like the Baltimore game. Baltimore matched up very, very well against them within the running game and whatnot, and that was a really big hit on them. And plus, we all know they've had some issues, at safety and whatnot. I mean, Hamlin and Rapp, they've been okay. You know what I mean? They've been serviceable, but let's be honest here, they're not Hyde and Poyer in their prime. You know what I mean? But then plus they've had injuries on and off throughout the year. Milano, Bernard, Taron Johnson. And various other guys going in and out of the lineup. But, I mean, this is Denver will be a big test for them.
Well, to me, the defense, all the issues starts with the pass rush, which hasn't been good enough.
Right.
Doesn't get to the quarterback often enough. And this kid, Bo Nix, is good at avoiding the rush.
Yeah.
So they've got to find a way. I mean, he's a rookie coming into a very difficult place to play. But he's played really well. And he's mobile. And if you saw what was his name, Milton did last week against the Bills. Now, granted, that was against backups.
Right.
But that further kind of exposed the whole system-wide issues.
Yeah.
You got to get to the quarterback. You can't let him escape. So I have concerns that the pass rush, the defensive line has to really, really show up in a big way that we'll find out if they're capable of doing that, because as the playoffs go on, if they're going to win, they need them. Not just one game, every game. And Sunday's the first big test for that, I think.
Yep, absolutely. And, Denver's offensive line, they're not slouches, They have 2 good tackles. You have Garrett Bowles on the outside, and he had kind of a rough start to his career, but then he eventually turned around and ended up getting a big extension a couple of years ago, and he's a pretty solid tackle. Mike McGlinchey on the other side, former San Francisco 49er. They brought him in as a free agent, I believe, about a year or two ago, and he's he's pretty good as well. And then, I mean, you look at the rest of the Broncos offense too. I mean, it's not even just the offensive line being able to put pressure on Nix and being able to speed up his clock, but you've got to be able to deal with their other weapons as well, you know.
Cortland Sutton made a big catch here when they came here last year.
Sutton's probably one of the most underrated wide receivers in the NFL. I mean, if he had a more consistent quarterback, I think for the first 5 years of his career, we'd be talking about him as probably one of the upper echelon wide receivers in the NFL. And now that he's got Bo Nix, and Nix is a pretty talented guy, if now he's going to make. He's making Sutton's life a lot easier, And then you have Marvin Mims on the other side, that kid's got speed to burn. Sean Payton's he's the kind of guy who loves incorporating screens into his offense. He did a lot when he was in New Orleans, and he's using it with Mims, and Mims is a threat to take it to the house every time he gets his hands on the ball. Those guys are going to be they're definitely, like I said, they're not slouches by any stretch of the imagination. They'll be tough to stop.
I'm pretty sure Denver started the season 0-2. Does that ring a bell to you?
I think so.
Okay, so that makes them. What did they finish? 10-7.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do a little bit of math. If they were 0-2 and they finished 10-7, they've won a lot of football games. Right. They've only lost 5 more since then.
And especially in a division like the AFC West. I mean, we all know who the king of that division is, and plus they gotta go against a resurgent Chargers team. So that's they had a tough road to get in here.
Well, and also the Kansas City game, they had them beat.
Yeah.
But they had their field goal blocked, and that was the game right there. Mm-hmm. So
yeah.
I think one of the things that concerns me a lot about the Bills is special teams. That punt block against the Rams, that's the game right there. Yeah. That's the game. It feels like, and I don't have any statistics on this, that they've been susceptible to pretty good kickoff returns. And you were talking about the screens that Denver might use, and that's the Bills' defense has a funny way of one of the things that they'll give an offense is that short little pass on the outside. Yeah. And if the player can make a big gain out of it, good for them. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? There's that space on feels like both sides of the field where they allow them to complete the pass and then hopefully make a tackle. The key for me, for the Bills' defense, is what it's been all year: turnovers. Mm-hmm. Force turnovers.
Yep.
And then go ahead.
The Buffalo's defense, I mean, if you can remember going back to the Bills' Super Bowl years.
Yes, I do.
The last Super Bowl team, the 93 one, that team was based mostly off of red zone defense and turnovers. That's pretty much a similar formula to what they're doing right now. I'm sure it's not necessarily by design, but that's the way it is this year. But you were talking about how Buffalo's defense plays. I mean, they're very aggressive. They're a one-gap defense. Attack that hole, and they get upfield quickly. And if you make one wrong read, covering a gap, I mean, that guy, whoever's in that gap, could be gone. That's how Baltimore was able to attack them in that game. I think it was in week 4, right?
Yes, week 4.
Yeah, and like I said, I know they had a lot of guys missing in that game, especially at linebacker and at nickel. But I mean, if you make one bad read or you make one false step, I mean, I guess Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry were gone in that game. And Sean Payton, he's a smart coach now. I mean, the guy doesn't have a Super Bowl ring for no reason, and it's not just because of Drew Brees. He can take advantage of that sort of stuff, and I'm sure that he's got a pretty good game plan cooked up for Buffalo.
You know he does. What about Sean McDermott? I mean, 6 straight years in the playoffs. He and Bill Bean said they were building Brandon Bean. Yes. I'm sorry. Thank you.
These are not the Oakland A's.
No. And that poor guy passed away too. Brandon Bean, thankfully, is healthy, as is Sean McDermott, and they promised they wanted to build for sustained success. They've done that. The one thing that they haven't done is win a Super Bowl championship. But McDermott in the playoffs has had some stumbles, most notably the 13-second game, which some might say is unfair to keep bringing it up, but it's there in the back of your mind.
You can't run from it.
And the Houston game this year, I didn't think they did a good job managing the clock at the end of either half. Mm-hmm. So those things come to your mind, and how much pressure is on Sean McDermott to not only come up with a game plan, but their game plan, I'm sure, will be good, but the importance of a coach, which he does, have a great feel for his team, when to go for it on fourth down. If you watch the Vikings in Detroit last Sunday night, the Vikings got stubborn because obviously Darnold didn't have it. They kept going for it on fourth and goal inside the 10, and it was never going to work the way Darnold was.
They probably kept watching Dan Campbell a little bit too much throughout the year. We all know how much that guy likes going for it.
I don't really have any issues with that, but you have to. In fact, it's exciting, but you have to know your team. Is like a couple times against Kansas City, McDermott was criticized because he took the field goal instead of going for it on fourth down. So I guess my question is, what kind of pressure is there on Sean McDermott to make a deeper playoff run? They've only been to one AFC championship game.
Unfair or not, he's got all the pressure in the world on him. I mean, I'll say this about McDermott. We all know that he has issues with clock management, timeout issues, game management and whatnot, but he's not the only one. I mean,
that's
true.
true.
I think some people, when they watch games and he makes mistakes like that, they try to, what's the word I'm looking for? Demonize the guy. You know what I mean? They try to make him out as if he's like Greg Williams or something like that. You know what I mean?
Thank God he's not.
Oh God, no. Yeah. I mean, we all know Buffalo's had far less coaches than him. But I will say this: at the end of the day, we know Sean has flaws, right?
Everybody does.
Everybody does. And that's my point. You look at some of the best coaches in the NFL. I mean, they've all had issues with situations like that. You look at a guy like Kyle Shanahan. He's been to 3 Super Bowls, twice in San Francisco, 1 in Atlanta. What's the common denominator among all 3 of those games? He's had screw-ups late in games, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's not the only one. Sean Payton, look at the Saturday game he had against Cincinnati a couple weeks ago. Arguably should have gone for 2 points in that situation. I mean, Sean McVay's another guy. I mean, he's a great play caller and a great offensive mind, but he's very conservative when it goes to fourth down decisions, There's a lot of good coaches out there who, for whatever reason, screw up in those situations. I mean, and I'm sure pretty much almost all teams now have some sort of game management clock guy on their staff. But I think they need to listen to him a little bit more. But McDermott in particular, he obviously has pressure on him, especially given the fact that they've lost in the second round now in the last 3 years in a row.
3 years in a row.
I'm sure he knows that he's got a burden on his shoulders and to be able to get over that hump. And I will say this about him. He's a good coach.
He's a great coach.
I would say he's a good coach, but he is obviously not perfect and he's flawed. But the Bills could do arguably a lot worse than him.
Well, that's what always drives me crazy when people say he needs to go, and I'm like, who you got better?
Exactly.
Who do you have better? He's an outstanding coach. Unfortunately, not perfect. Some things have gone against him. This is as healthy as the Bills have been for a while in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. But there's no injury excuses this time.
Nope. But it's arguably the toughest matchup they've had in the wild card in the last 5 years.
Well, if you want to be a champion,
you got to go through good teams.
Yes, and that's just the way it's going to work. I would love to see a Bills-Rams Super Bowl because there's no way the LA Rams are playing. That's the best game they've played in 35, 25 years, and they aren't going to do it again.
Right.
And the block punt turned out to be the difference in the game. Mm-hmm. But that's a little bit off topic here. What do you think offensively will work best for the Bills besides Josh putting on the Superman cape, which he has a fun way of doing?
Yep. Well, it's funny. I was kind of studying Denver a little bit last night. I mean, you talked about some of the best players in their defense. Obviously, we know Surtain's. I mean, people talk about him being a spitting image of his father. The former.
Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, his father was a pretty darn good corner in his own right with Miami back in the day. But I mean, we all know he could take a top guy away. But it's not just him, You look at some of the other guys on that defense. Nick Benito, he had 13 and a half sacks this year. Him and Jonathan Cooper are pretty darn good edge rush tandem, And Benito's also a guy who could spy Josh. They use him in that sort of situation too. I mean, he's probably a dark horse candidate for Defensive Player of the Year.
So do you think Josh runs more this week than he's run most of this season?
They could, but they also have a pretty good defensive line as well. Zach Allen, he's like, I don't know if he's necessarily a guy who a lot of Bills fans know about, but he had an excellent year. And admittedly, the biggest reason why I know about that is because I had him on one of my fantasy teams.
Fantasy guy.
I had him on a fantasy team, and he was pretty darn good this year. But I mean, I think maybe one of the best ways you can get after Denver is attacking their linebackers and pass coverage, because they're not that great in that regard. So this could be a game where instead of maybe handing the ball off to Cook and Davis and Ty Johnson a lot, they might be able to build them into the passing game this week and be able to try to attack them that way, whether it's wheel routes out of the backfield or maybe a little angle Texas route out of the backfield. You could try to be able to attack them that way instead of the handoff. Maybe it's more of a long handoff.
Well, you're going to see them try to run the ball.
Yeah,
we
know they will.
And that three-headed monster led by Cook. Mm-hmm. And I think you're probably right about some of that. And the good thing is some of these guys, Shakir got a week off, so a lot of these guys are fresh. Mm-hmm. Coleman, I think, needed those snaps last week, and he's got to get back to the level he was at before he was injured.
And plus, he's a rookie, and he's got to learn how to be able to play this late, deep into a year.
Well, plus the emotions for all these guys, really. At least the Bills have been there. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how much, if anything, that counts for that. But I'll tell you what, let's take a quick trip around the rest of the playoff matchups. Mm-hmm. We'll start with the Saturday games, which are the AFC games. It's Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and what's the other one?
Chargers and Houston.
Thank you. Okay. Well, for what it's worth, I think the Chargers beat Houston. I think Houston got cooked by injuries.
Yeah.
Dell.
That's one of the worst matchups I think Houston could possibly have going in, because we know the Chargers have a good front. I mean, we know they have Khalil Mack. We know they have Joey Bosa. And their defensive line is pretty solid too, and they're aggressive. And Houston's interior line, not very good.
And the Chargers have something they haven't had, a really outstanding head coach in Harbaugh.
Mm-hmm. Probably the best head coach they've had since
Don Coryell.
Well, I was going to say Marty Schottenheimer at first.
Oh, yeah, Schottenheimer, yeah.
But we know Schottenheimer. We all know his playoff history. But, but yeah, I mean, Harbaugh's excellent. And we know the guy's gone everywhere and win. Michigan, the 49ers, Stanford even. You know what I mean? He's a much better coach than he was a quarterback. But I mean, he his teams reflect him too. Strong in the trenches, and that's an area that Houston's, especially their offensive line, is not very good, except for Laramie Tunsil.
The Chargers, to me, are a very dangerous team. Pittsburgh and Baltimore,
yep.
Division game. To me, that's the last thing you want, and it's in Baltimore, and Pittsburgh has this funny way of playing Baltimore for the most part in Baltimore, although they got blown out the last time they played. But the time before that, the Steelers, they score one touchdown and they won 18 to 16.
Like that, yeah. So
Pittsburgh has a very good defense and an offense that's not really that impressive.
Oh no, I mean, we know this is for the last couple of years, Pittsburgh's offensive line has been not very good.
Big problem.
Right, it's been a big problem. They need to be able to figure that out and get that fixed. I mean, Mike. Otherwise, they're going to keep going one and done in the playoffs every year. And like you said, I mean, they seem to play Baltimore tough.
They do.
I mean, and especially because it's a division game. There's no secrets there. But at the same time, the Steelers look like they're on fumes. I mean, they
do.
They're pretty much a one-trick pony. If they can't run the ball with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, it's vertical shots to George Pickens.
And that's it.
I mean, look what happened with Pickens last week. He had, one catch for 0 yards, maybe 3 targets? Yeah. I mean, he's a talented receiver, but is Russell Wilson really the right guy to be able to get on the ball?
If Wilson doesn't fumble inside the 5, I forgot which game it was, it turned the game entirely around. Right. And if they score there, then maybe they're in a different spot. But I agree with you. I think Baltimore and the Chargers win. We'll come back and do the Bills. That'll be our final part of the segment. Let's go over to the NFC. And Tampa Bay and the Commanders. And then, of course, Minnesota and the Rams, and then the Eagles and the Packers. So let's start with the Eagles and the Packers. We don't know what the status is of either quarterback.
I'm assuming because it's playoff time, both of them are going to assume.
Well, I would assume that too.
Yeah.
And I think as good as Green Bay is, I think Philadelphia is a little bit better.
Yeah.
A little bit more physical. And Saquon Barkley gives them something. He's better than number 8, Josh Jacobs, who's pretty good in his own right.
Yep, I was just going to say.
But Barkley, he's the MVP candidate for Philadelphia. He won't and shouldn't win it, but that's another story.
You could also argue that Philadelphia's entire offensive line is
Yeah, they're
MVP.
very good. Yeah, they're very good.
Shout out to Jeff Stoutland, probably the best offensive line coach in the NFL.
Oh, better than Cromer?
Other than Aaron Cromer.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we got that on the
Stout-
record here.
Stout's
We
phenomenal.
are in Buffalo.
Yeah.
But the Eagles, they're tough, they're physical, and unlike last year when they were where Pittsburgh is, seemingly running on fumes and collapsing, they seem to be firing on a lot of cylinders.
Yeah, we know the Eagles had a lot of issues down the stretch last year, but they're not exactly the juggernaut they were 2 years ago.
No,
the Eagles, but they're still a pretty darn good team. And I mean, their defense has gotten younger. They rectified their defensive system, by bringing back Vic Fangio, because Fangio was a consultant on that Super Bowl run 2 years ago, coordinated by Jonathan Gannon. But it was Fangio's system they were running. Then he left last year to go to Miami. Patricia and I think it was Sean Desai were running that. Neither one of those guys worked out. Brought back Fangio, and voila, they're right back. They're right back to where they were in that department. But I'm kind of iffy on Jordan Love. You know what I mean? You watch Green Bay. It's handoff after handoff after handoff to Josh Jacobs and relying on their offensive line. It's almost like they're only throwing the ball like maybe 20 times a game. I mean,
if you can win, what's the matter with that?
Well, I mean, if you can win, yeah,
I do it all the time.
at some point you got to be able to throw the ball.
Yes,
you know what
you
I
have
mean?
to stretch the field.
They lost Christian Watson.
That hurt. That hurt.
They do have two other solid receivers like Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed and whatnot, but I just don't see how they're going to be able to hold up against that Eagles team. Because I'm taking Philadelphia.
A little shout out for Buffalo's own Isaiah McDuffie, number 58 for the Packers. And then I think a very fascinating matchup is the Washington Commanders and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Rookie quarterback versus veteran quarterback. Both have had great moments. That to me is one of the best matchups out there. I couldn't tell you why. Just looking at it,
they face each other in Week 1.
Yeah, and it just seems like it feels like it's going to be a college football game where all they do is score.
Probably, but excuse me. And that's the thing. I mean, Tampa's got a pretty good coordinator now on offense, Liam Cohen. He's been getting some talk as a head coach around the league, but we'll see if he ends up getting a job. But the one thing about Washington is he has had a pretty good rookie year, but the thing with Washington is Cliff Kingsbury runs their offense, right? Pretty solid coordinator, right? But his scheme, for whatever reason, seems to kind of take a dump late in the year. For some reason
Well, other teams have now seen things on film later in the year.
Yes, but for some reason, it's almost as if Kingsbury doesn't have any sort of counterpunch to that.
Unlike Joe Brady, who seems to have a counterpunch for everything.
Right, yep. But, I think him going against a pretty good defensive mind like Todd Bowles, I think Tampa's going to winning that game, but I think it's going to be close.
Okay, and Minnesota and the L.A. Rams, and I don't know why, I just have a feeling the L.A. Rams are going to win that game, which has now been moved from Los Angeles because of the wildfires to Arizona, so much for home field advantage. I think the Viking Cinderella run comes to an end. Cinderella is a little unfair. They did win 14 games.
2 years ago was their Cinderella one when they were winning all those one-score games. Yeah.
I watched that Detroit game and I was like, wow, Detroit just pounded them physically. I'm a Matthew Stafford fan. I've always liked that guy. I'm happy for Sam Darnold. I just think, and if Stafford finds 10-17. That's tough to stop. And the Vikings do have a very good defense, but I just have a funny feeling about the Rams.
That one's honestly, I think that one to me is honestly a coin flip because, I mean, you got the master against the student, Sean McVay against Kevin O'Connell. We know O'Connell was on his staff when they won the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, so it's also going to be a pretty good battle of wits too. McVay going against Brian Flores. I mean, like you said, Minnesota's got a good defense. But, And honestly, we know Minnesota. They got some firepower too on offense. Justin Jefferson, Addison,
Fun to watch.
Hawkinson, Aaron Jones. But I don't think they really have the greatest offensive line. I think that there's.
Well, that's why they didn't run the ball inside the 10-yard line the other day.
Yeah, and the Rams. Yeah, they lost Aaron Donald, one of the best to ever do it. But they've rebuilt that defensive line in a hurry.
Yeah,
guys like Jared Verse and I think the other guy's name was Byron Young or Brian Young, whatever his name is. But they got a pretty nice defensive line who can get after quarterbacks, and I think that game is going to be in a coin flip too. But I think at the end of the day, I think the Rams might end up pulling that one out.
All right, so now let's wrap up this football segment. We'll be coming back to talk Sabres hockey, but first we have to pick the Bills and the Broncos. How do you see this one going?
It's going to be close. I mean, this is the best wild card team Buffalo's faced in the last 5 years or so. I mean, you stack them up against, what was it, the Colts in 2020, right? New England in 21, Miami 2 years ago, and Pittsburgh last year. I think Denver's going to give them a bit of a scare, and it's going to be a close one. But I think Buffalo will edge them out. Let's go 27-24 Buffalo. I think Denver's defense will hold them under 30 points, but just under 30 points. So it'll be a close one, but I think Buffalo will eventually edge it out.
And you're going to put it on the foot of one Tyler Bass.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I know it's kind of a bold statement, so to speak, but hey,
Well, I'm going to go with the Bills in a game that is going to have more stress than I prefer to have on a Sunday afternoon. I'll say 31-27. The Bills will get to 30, yes, I know. But these are two old AFL teams, and they like to score points. And the Bills are going to have to score points because Denver's a stingy defense, and I think the Bills are going to have to control the ball and finish drives. And I'm sticking with the Bills, and if you want to call me a homer, go ahead. Well, that's gonna go ahead.
If you need some stress, have a beer or two, Stu. You'll be good.
that only makes things worse.
Make things worse.
All
Take
right,
the edge off.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk Buffalo Sabres hockey. This is This Week in Buffalo Sports.
Western New York Immediate Care. Since 2005, our hometown urgent care walk-in clinics have been committed to providing the highest quality urgent care for the Western New York community, with 4 convenient locations in Amherst, Buffalo, Depew, and Orchard Park. We are open every day, including holidays. Walk-ins welcome or reserve a time. We have on-site labs and x-rays, and you'll always see an in-person provider. Visit WNYImmediatecare.com.
Just results.
Your life can change in an instant after an injury. You need a trusted partner at your side. Hi, I'm Dan Chacha. At Dan Chacha Injury Attorneys, we're here to help you navigate the challenges you'll face. Our dedicated team fights tirelessly for your rights, ensuring you get the compensation you deserve. Don't worry, Chacha's got you. Call Dan Chacha Injury Attorneys today for a free consultation. Your injury is our priority.
Call 648-3030. Just results.
Logistics Plus is a global transportation provider headquartered in Erie, PA, with locations worldwide, including right here in Western New York. Logistics Plus is consistently recognized as a fast-growing transportation and logistics company, great supply chain partner, top freight broker, leading project cargo manager, and a great place to work. With a strong passion for excellence, our 500-plus employees put the plus in logistics.
For an efficient, personal approach for all of your transportation needs, more information about our Buffalo office is available at logisticsplus.com/Buffalo.
Welcome back to This Week in Buffalo Sports. He's Tony Fiorello. I'm Stu Boyar. We ran a little bit long on the NFL segment. My apologies for that. Now we're going to have a quick discussion of the Buffalo Sabres, who won last night 4-0 in Ottawa. It's a huge win for them because that's one of those teams they've got to beat. And my question to you is, have fans lost hope? This team is dead last or close to dead last again, and they've got a mountain to climb to get into the playoffs. Where do you think the fan base is?
It's a huge win to get out from last place in the Eastern Conference, to stay in last place in the Eastern Conference. But not to take a shot at the Sabres while they're down. But hey, after all those years of losing and whatnot, I'm not sure how really any fan sees any sort of light at the end of the tunnel, But it's just they're at the bottom of the East because there's three words that I like to use to describe Buffalo right now: young, dumb, and not very good defensively. That's not three words, but it's three things to describe them as.
The frustrating thing is not so much that they're young, because you can see their nights. The talent is like, wow.
They
they beat the Islanders. They beat the Rangers.
Neither team is playing well, but
they just blew those teams out of the rink.
Yeah.
You can and the first period against the Colorado Avalanche, they've got young, good talent.
The three words were young, soft, and stupid.
Okay, that's fair. But this is my take. Last year I went to the Maple Leafs game where Austin Matthews got his 60th goal. There were 85% Leafs fans in the building, and unfortunately the Sabres have earned that. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know, who do you blame for where they are? Is it just Kevin Adams?
It's squarely on the shoulders of Kevin Adams and Terry Pagula.
Okay, well, how do they get out of this state? Do you want them to trade Dylan Cousins? Do you want them to trade Tage Thompson? These guys are good hockey players. Yeah. But can you win with them? See, that's... Kevin was talking about the young talent development's not linear. Well, more of these young guys should have spent time at Rochester, which they finally did with Devin Levi. But it's too late for some of these guys. When Lindy Ruff came out and said that Owen Power got out-muscled, that was not a compliment.
No,
Can you imagine your head coach just said that? And offensively, he's pretty good. Defensively, please knock somebody down.
Oh, yeah.
Drill somebody somewhere.
Cover your lane or cover your guy if you're a man.
And you know what? I like seeing Dennis Gilbert in that lineup every night. He's got some grit. And good to see Jack Quinn score a couple of goals. So the talent is there. I just don't, have you lost hope? How do you fix this team?
After every loss, they always try to, throw out the excuse, we're learning, da, 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 da. You guys have been learning this is what, the fourth year in a row? This is the youngest roster in the NHL, right? And they can't, more than anything, I've been talking, you and I have talked about this before, more than anything, this team needs a Chris Drury trade.
Yeah.
Bring in a guy who has been there, done that, has won a cup somewhere.
Is a real leader.
A leader and is a quality veteran. We're not talking about a washed-up over-the-hill guy like a Brian Gianto or a Kyle Oposo.
No. More along the lines of Jason Zucker, who's been one of their best
Zucker
players.
Has been a very nice find.
Yeah.
But the issue is those guys don't grow on trees. And when one of them does become available, they don't want to go to Buffalo. Why? Because they don't want to take on that pressure of being able to get them over that hump, because the pressure in Buffalo's enormous right now. It's the closest thing to being able to play in a Canadian market without actually being in a Canadian market, And I think today's athlete just doesn't want that pressure on them. There's no guy out there like a Mark Messier or Chris Drury who want to come to Buffalo and say, I want to be able to take on this challenge head on.
Well, part of that is because the team's not close enough.
Right.
Because when Messier went to the Rangers, they were pretty close.
Yeah.
And he was like the final piece. The Sabres have lots of work to do. However, am always an optimist.
And when Drury came in, they were down in the dumps. They were just coming out of bankruptcy.
They didn't have a guy named Dominic Hasek?
No.
That was Ryan Miller.
Miller was he was in Rochester at that point.
But they knew he was going to be good.
Everybody knew it. But and to your point before, you were talking about, some of the guys who should have been in Rochester to start off with. Sportsnet put out a great story a couple of weeks ago about how they had rushed, some guys. They're doing a decent job in the amateur scouting department. They draft them, but the issue is once they do get their hands on them, they don't keep them in Rochester long enough because they don't have enough quality veterans on the main roster who can keep them down there. So when they don't have them, they rush them along and because they say, oh, they're good enough and they're good enough to be able to play right now. Well, that's because they don't have anybody better.
Well, it seems to me that the way UPL is playing, that Devin Levi might be a nice piece for a trade.
Could be.
I like Devin Levi, but
it also takes goaltenders very long to develop.
Yeah, and he's where he should be, where he should have been when the season started last year.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's try to remain optimistic about the Sabres. Let's hope we're back next week discussing a Bills win and their next opponent. But for the moment, we want to remind everybody the show has been brought to you by Western New York Immediate Care, the Paul Wolf Insurance Agency, and Logistics Plus of Buffalo. Tim Gardner is our producer. He's Tony Fiorello. I'm Stu Boyar. Thanks to you for watching. Have a good night, everybody.